Welcome, everyone, to Real Estate on the Up, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the real estate world in Orlando. I'm your host, Kyle Madorin, and on this show, we're all about pulling back the curtain with the unfiltered truth about real estate. We're not just here to sell houses. We're here to provide concierge-style service because everyone loves being treated like a VIP. This podcast is your go-to resource for transparency, integrity, and the knowledge you need to make smarter real estate decisions. Whether you're a seasoned investor or a first-time homebuyer, we've got you covered. So buckle up and get ready to move up in the world of real estate. It's time for Real Estate on the Up. Welcome back to Real Estate on the Up. I'm your host, Kyle Madorin, bringing you expert insights and strategies to help you navigate the ever-evolving world of real estate. Today, we have a powerhouse guest joining us, Irwin Boris. With a background as a CPA, lender, and underwriter, Irwin has spent the last decade mastering cash flow-focused investment strategies in industrial and flex properties. His approach is built on stability, return on investment, and conservative leverage, ensuring sustainable long-term value for both himself and his investors. As the senior managing director at Paycar Capital, Irwin is hands-on in sourcing, underwriting, and analyzing commercial real estate investments. He's known for his sharp focus on high-demand, limited supply markets, leveraging an extensive network of brokers, owners, and managers to find top-tier opportunities. What truly sets him apart is his first loss commitment. He invests his own capital in every deal, aligning his interests with those of his investors. If you're looking for investment strategies to generate consistent returns with calculated risk, you won't want to miss this conversation. So let's dive in. Irwin Boris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Carl. Thank you.
It is a pleasure. This is a very exciting conversation, so I'm really happy you were able to join me today. To get started, let's just go back a number of years to explore how you got interested in this. So what got you into the world of real estate?
Well, I guess it sort of helps when your father's a real estate attorney. And so I've been around it, growing up. My grandparents owned a few commercial buildings. My father worked for a large residential landlord who did office and did other types of properties. And so even though I have an undergraduate degree in accounting, I've sat for the CPA exam and I practiced accounting, the work that I did, most of it was real estate related, whether it was condominium developers, operating partnerships. So I was always around the numbers. And well, I guess after 4 years of accounting, I sort of had enough of, back then nothing was computerized. It was all big, anyone has seen one of those old fashioned, 14 column pieces of paper with lots of little boxes on them. That's how accounting was done.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
oh yeah, it was a lot of fun. And when I left there, we were first starting to computerize, audit work papers. So it was all done on computer, but for years it's done on old manual pieces of paper with lots of columns. And so I went to work for a large owner-operator, and I got a chance to see really what it was like to manage a building and what you had to do to keep it full and collect your rent and deal with all the different issues, whether you're going to landlord-tenant court. And this was in the city of New York, where it's sort of pro-tenant, and tenants knew the system, and some of them, it could take you 9 months or a year to get them out. And it was a union building, so I had a union crew, and I had to deal with staffing issues and federal and state agencies. And I really got an appreciation for what I dealt with on the accounting side of really why some of those numbers were crazy and how they could gyrate from year to year. And, throughout my career, I've either worked as a lender, lending on various types of commercial real estate, or I've worked with owner-operators on the operating side doing acquisitions and underwriting and asset management. So I'd like to think that over the years I've heard all the good stories, all the bad stories, all the lies, all the promises, and so I've been in all the food groups, and it just made sense to find out what's the least headaches, what's the most boring investment, how can you know where your cash flow is coming from. People that invested in multifamily, I guess from 2010 to 2019, nobody lost money. It was hard to screw up a deal when the market was going like this. And then, when interest rates moved and operating expenses moved and COVID came along and there were supply chain issues, that's when the trouble began. And also, if you look at a lot of the sponsors, the syndicators, back in like 2007 to 2010, some of those guys were in high school or in college. They hadn't really seen the cycles, and they didn't really understand it. So they're just financially engineering the deals. Well, we'll take short-term floating rate debt. We don't need a full-term interest rate cap. No, expenses aren't going to move. And it was sort of like the perfect storm the last couple of years. Insurance costs tripled for apartments. The floating rate index really went up from like 0 to 4.5%. Payroll costs went up, and it was just a disaster. I guess about 10 years ago, I did some work for a large owner who was also one of my borrowers when I was a lender, and they've always had a foot in the industrial and commercial space. It wasn't sexy. People thought of it years ago. It was dirty. It was ugly. And some of it is. And I asked them, why do you guys own this stuff? And they said, because we know we're always getting paid. We know the cash is always coming in. These tenants need to be there. And so over the years, I spent a lot of time working on them with acquisitions and really got a better understanding on why I believe it's a more secure investment, because you know what your cash flow is the day you close. And so I've embarked on this journey and over the years, and every year I get deeper into it, and I'm so happy that it just continues to pay. And I learn more about tenants and a lot about other businesses, and you understand why they need to be there. And it really helps with the acquisition and the negotiation with them.
Yeah, I think you outlined some of the headaches that investors feel when they go into the residential world, whether it's a single property or multifamily that they're in. It can be exceptionally challenging. And right now, condo investment has totally disappeared because the insurance on condo buildings has gotten so ridiculous. Between that and the condo association dues, makes those types of investments, which were very lucrative and desirable previously, much more difficult for small investors.
Yes, it's true, especially in South Florida, where they need to pick up those reserves since the building collapse. Yep. That the special assessments on all these buildings, between the facade work and the terraces, like my parents have a large condo down in Boca, and the assessment is just crazy. They have to replace all the balconies because for some reason water got in and it's rotting the rebar, it's holding up the slabs, and that sort of hammers whatever cash flow you get.
Absolutely. So looking at all this, you've been involved in so many different types of real estate investments over the years. What would you consider to be the ideal investment asset class currently?
The ideal investment class is something where the ownership, the partnership, is not really exposed to fluctuating operating expenses. You want to know that your cash flow is your cash flow. And the industrial and shallow bay flex, because the properties are largely triple net, meaning the tenants pay 100% of the operating costs, or if they're modified gross, 100% of the increase in the operating expenses, although the landlord in most cases still retains most of the structural obligation for maintaining the roof and the walls and the parking lot. Well, parking lot maintenance you could actually bill back to the tenants as part of the operating expenses. So I like to know that the cash flow is coming in, and I don't have to worry about crazy insurance costs or real estate taxes or payroll. And in looking back the last 3 or 4 years, when the property insurance costs were spiking for apartment owners, we saw a modest increase on the industrial side. It was deemed a safer risk for the insurers and the reinsurers, and with the modest increase we were able to pass off to our tenants. So it really insulated.
Yeah, that is a lot different than what we're seeing in the residential world for sure. So how do you choose and identify an investment? What are you looking for?
I look for, first of all, we do very few single tenant buildings because, if that tenant moves out, you're sort of dead in the water until you can find another replacement. And even though you might have 9 months or a year's notice, they're not renewing their lease, it's still hard. So we look for multiple tenants, and we look for tenants in buildings where they need to be in that location. So they're tied to their suppliers, they're tied to their customers, or they're tied to their labor force. So if, for example, I have a single tenant building or a multi-tenant building, but one of the tenants employs 50 or 75 people, and the average tenure is 15 years, and their commute is 3 miles, that tenant isn't going very far. Right. Because they might lose some of their workforce if it upsets the commute. And another thing we always do is look for buildings that we can buy at a substantial discount to replacement cost. because that tells me I could always be the low-cost provider and compete with any new development that might occur in that market. I don't buy in primary markets. We buy in a lot of secondary markets. We buy B-class buildings because, everyone wants to build. They want to build these monstrosities like Amazon is in. No one's building a small building. And there are a lot more tenants that can probably fit in, 10 to 50,000 square feet that can occupy 200,000 square feet to 500,000 square feet. And then when you go down to the shallow bay, you have tenants as small as 2,500 square feet or 5,000 square feet. Think of, the plumber, the electrician, the painter, the sheetrock guy. Everybody needs a third of the space for office, for bookkeeping and ordering, and the rest of it is for equipment or driving your trucks into the back. And in the shallow bay, you find a lot of interesting entrepreneurial people. I've looked at buildings where one guy raised tropical fish, one guy grew coral. You had people doing types of, what are they called, hydroponic gardening, sprouting seeds to sell to nurseries, all indoors there. So you get to learn a lot about different businesses. And so like a shallow bay, I would call that the multifamily of the industrial world, because you might have 300,000 square feet with 48 tenants. So
yeah. Yeah, you get a variety of businesses and characters, I'm sure. Yeah, interesting. So when you're looking at investment potential, are you looking primarily in certain locations? Do you work across the country? And how is the Florida market looking for you right now?
Well, I look across the country, but I like to know I can get there on a direct flight within 3 hours, only if in the event of something happens. So I pretty much cut off I'm on the East Coast, so I'm straight down the middle as where I am. But I'm also looking at deals that can generate at least 8% current in the first year to the investors. So the Florida market, the prices are high, capitalization rates are low. It's hard to find deals that can generate that kind of cash flow. And so although we have some that I'm looking at now, but, when I look at the cost to replace the building, replacement cost, it's still high. And I'm trying to scratch my head if it's worth taking a risk or not. Like I'm looking at something in Orlando, something in Ocala, because they fit fit my mold of cash flow. So most of what we're buying, we've been lucky at some deals in Atlanta. I've been lucky looking at stuff in Virginia. We have a current deal. I was out on Monday in Ohio, buying it from the original builder who's in his 70s. And for him, it's just about estate planning and, slowing down. And the middle of the country is really kind of interesting because that's, pretty much the old Rust Belt. The rails are there, the roadways are there, and you could be at either coast in a day's time. And the middle of the country has a lot of, I'm thinking Indiana and Ohio in particular, have a lot of incentives to get businesses to relocate there. So you see a lot of people that are there and you scratch your head, why are they there? Well, I don't have to pay real estate taxes. I got an educated workforce and I could be at either coast in a day.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that and also in terms of labor, the cost of living in a lot of those states currently is some of the lowest in the nation, which is, used to be that the South really was the inexpensive area to live, but that's changed significantly. And so we're seeing, in real estate, residential real estate as well, some great opportunities in the Midwest where, like you were saying, the Rust Belt, where we didn't see it previously.
No, and now what we're seeing, a really interesting phenomena is because interest rates have stayed higher for longer, you're seeing many owners who were hoping that interest rates came down and they could sell for more, but because maybe they own a few buildings and the kids don't want them, or maybe they're retiring, they don't want to own their building anymore, but maybe they'll still operate their business for a few years before they sell that a lot of people are coming to market, and there are a lot of opportunities at higher cap rates in various parts of the country, and you just got to sort of beat the bushes for them. They're out there.
Right.
And it's just amazing how many I have on my desk, and then it's a question of, all right, which one do you want to do first? We purposely don't operate a fund because this way investors get to choose what they want to invest in. And if you're in a fund, and some people unfortunately are, if you have one or two bad deals, that sort of turns the whole pool of assets sort of sideways on the returns. And by not operating a fund, I can work with 1031 investors. If you have an exchange, I can stick you in a deal. And you get the same benefits of, if we do a refinance cash out, you get the benefits of that cash out. Where if you're an exchange investor and someone puts you into a DST, a Delaware statutory trust, they don't do that. You're stuck there. So it's more partnership like for an investor. And we like flexibility that way too. Some investors like one deal, they don't like another one. I don't want to, everyone's got to make up their own mind.
It sounds like an attractive structure for sure. Now, who are your typical investors?
We have, well, it's funny because the family history is, it's an immigrant family. They came here, Middle Eastern descent. We're in the fourth generation now, and they told me the stories about all the odd jobs they took, as immigrants do, and then they were able to start this business. The parent company is in the floor covering business, so we manufacture and import rugs. They're either made in Turkey or in China, various parts, and we have, and so over the years through all the profits, everybody says, well, we're going to make our money in real estate. That's what a lot of people have done over the years. So they've, put all their profits into real estate. And as a big user of industrial buildings for warehouse space, they taught themselves how to build it. So about 5 years ago when I joined, think of the original Friends and Family, the country club friends, but you never invite us into your deals. We're all in multifamily and we want to do some industrial. So we started opening up the deals to outsiders. And among them, I have one guy who actually, he's a 1031 investor in my last deal. He produces music for Hollywood, California. I have a bunch of doctors. I have dentists. I have regular business people who have sold their business and want cash flow and still want the upside and don't want to put all the money in the stock market. People with substantial retirement accounts that want to come in through an independent custodian because it's diversification. They're not, stuck on where the S&P or NASDAQ's going these days, and it's a lot of gyrations out there. So we have a lot of different investors, but most of them are really focused on the cash flow. Although, like every other sponsor, you compute, or you underwrite for a proposed internal rate of return, an IRR, an equity multiple. But for them, they're like, well, what's the cash flow year one? That's the question. And they're like, oh, you're going to force us to sell in year 5 or 7 or whatever it is. I'm like, no, we always have a discussion, because most of them are like, I have to figure out what I'm going to have to do with that money then. So I'd like to think my interests are better aligned because as a sponsor, my promoted interest decreases over time. But then we can hold as long as they want to hold. We've held assets for 25, 30 years because of the cash flow. You just refinance, you put the money into something else, and you just get your cash flow.
And I love the idea of the triple net leases, kind of set it and forget it, and you get that income. Like you were saying, it's so much more hands off than most residential, multifamily, or single unit. So, yeah.
No, it is. The only thing is, depending on the size of your tenants, you watch. They're typically 3 or 5 year leases, maybe with some renewal options. And it's about speaking with your tenants on a constant basis to find out, how their business is, seeing if they need to expand, seeing what they're seeing in the market in general. It gives you a pretty good read on potential for other acquisitions or on markets. And unlike residential leases, where typically you have to let the landlord know, 30 or 60 days in advance if you're renewing. On smaller tenants, we have a 9-month renewal provision, whereas if you don't tell me you're renewing 9 months prior to your lease expiration, I have that space on the market. And so
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you forgot to exercise your renewal or you don't have a renewal, when you see a leasing broker show up with people to walk through your space, the bell goes off.
Right. Yeah.
And if you're a larger tenant, you might have a year where you have to tell me whether you're staying or not.
Well, I like the idea too that you work on establishing relationships with these tenants, and it's not just about getting them in the building and then forgetting about them, but you're working on that communication, making sure that because it works best for everyone if they stay, right? If they renew.
Correct.
And so I think that's a great idea.
During COVID, I think I had 2 tenants that asked for a little bit of time. They were doing their PPP loans, and they asked for 30 or 60 days, and we took advantage of that, and we gave them the time, and we said, look, you know what? Since you've been here for so many years prior to our ownership, and we think you're going to be here, would you mind extending your lease another 2 years? So we sort of did a blend and extend, and they were very happy, very grateful, and they've renewed since then. So it was a win-win for everybody.
Definitely sounds like it. Yeah. We get a lot of questions from people about market conditions. And of course, the adage is you want to wait for the bottom of the market to invest, right? That's the best time to buy. So, in your opinion, are we going to see the bottom of the commercial real estate market, and when is the best time to start purchasing?
I think if you're waiting to see the bottom, by the time you see it, you missed it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You
Yeah.
know, you think of it, it's more like a bell curve. And so we're coming across and we're down. I don't know how far down we're going to go. I don't know how far straight across is before you see a spike. But given what's going on with interest rates, and tariffs and the economy and what I'm seeing as far as sellers coming to the market and the leverage returns we can get, I think that there's always a way to find a deal that's going to generate 8% or more cash flow if you look. And so I think the next 36 months, in what I do, is really going to be a great buying opportunity. Because even if we do onshore all these businesses and they are going to build these factories, but I'm saying that you never can time the bottom. And I think the next 3 years for me on industrial and small bay is going to be great. There's so many people that want to sell. The financing, although it's a little more costly than it used to be, there's still positive leverage you can get to generate the cash flow. And we're still finding more opportunities than I can capitalize.
That's great. Yeah.
Which is great. And so that's why we're out there beating the bushes. And I think that it also depends on the asset class. Multifamily, I still think is going to take some lumps. There's a lot of loans that are going to mature that can't refinance. Or if they do refinance, there's no cash flow to the investors. I think office is really going to take a beating.
Right.
Especially with the new administration wanting to get rid of all the GSA-owned properties or break leases. And I just saw a news article this morning. It's like this, $18 billion of real estate tied to those leases, in addition to the assets they might want to sell. So I think office is going to take a beating. I know that neighborhood retail has been doing really well post-pandemic. There's a lot of money, a lot of institutional money pouring into that right now. I know that some of the big REITs like Blackstone, who own 100,000 single-family homes, are starting to shed some of those, even at discounts to their acquisition costs. So that sort of scratches my head. I don't know what's driving that. But I'd like to think that the asset class that we're in is a little more resilient because you have leases that are 3 or 5 or 7 years and you have enough runway to find another tenant.
Right. I know that a lot of residential investors worry about market collapse. I mean, that's something we hear a lot about. And personally, I don't see that happening. I don't see any telltale signs of that looming on the horizon for us. But I know that there's also a lot of pent-up demand out there because of the interest rates. People have just been sitting on the sideline, kind of waiting for things to shake loose a little bit and come down. I'm sure that also affects your world. Do you foresee there being any change in interest rates this year? Do you think there's going to be something that works positively for the market in general?
I think, from what I'm hearing from all the economists, and I listen to Bloomberg every morning and I read a lot of the papers, a lot of it is saying that because of, tariffs, that we might, it's going to force the economy to be a little more stagnant. And I heard a couple of people use the word recession. And when you look at the way that will affect the Federal Reserve, maybe we see an interest rate cut towards the end of the year. They're waiting and seeing. But, the economy has been pretty resilient. But still, I think it's something we have to watch. And they're all waiting on the data. And unfortunately, the data is always hindsight to see that. But then again, I heard one economist talking about how the consumer is resilient and they keep spending money. I said, well, let's look at where credit card debt is. It's at an all-time high. I'm like, they only talk about the good points on these news shows because I think they're trying to sell their own stock or something. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, they're spending the money. It's just not their money. It's the bank's money.
No, it's the bank money. So I remember years ago when last time all the credit card debt spiked, there was a lot of bankruptcies. All right, there's been a lot more bankruptcy reforms and it's a lot more difficult, but I still think eventually, especially with all the government layoffs and private industry laying off, I think that we're headed for some uncharted territory. And I think maybe that's why I'm seeing more opportunities to buy because people want to de-risk. They want to hold cash.
Certainly.
So I'm looking to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think there's so much volatility right now. People are worried about the stock market. And, historically, if people have that concern about where the stock market's going to go, they see real estate as a safe harbor and it will spur investment possibly. So it could be beneficial if that happens. Not that any of us want to see that, of course, but I think that could work in your favor and in our favor too.
No, that's what I'm saying. We're looking to take advantage of it,
Yeah.
and then, when we look for assets, I'm never going to be the high bidder. I'm not going to have the highest offer, but I'm going to be the guy that closes. Think about, it's like if I know, like in Dallas, after a hailstorm, the car dealers sell all the cars because they're all dinged up, scratch and dent. That's what I like to buy, things that are dented up. And once a deal gets, falls out of contract once, or the broker can't get the price they want, some sellers either take the deal off the market or they say, okay, what can we get? And that's when people call me.
That's great. Is there a minimum investment amount that you are seeking from your investors?
Typically, my investors have all been $100,000 or more. Some of them are, much higher than that. But because if you need to raise like 10 or $15 million to raise it in small pieces, it just takes too long. And I find that people that are willing to commit the money are really looking for the cash flow. It's not
Right.
like you're a deal junkie and you want to put $20,000 into 50 deals. I don't know why anyone would do that. I understand that maybe you want to try out different sponsors, but how do you manage that for tax purposes? How do you keep track of thousands of investments that way? It's just mind-boggling. And because we're typically oversubscribed, at least on our last 4 deals, that's why I keep the minimum at 100, although most people are probably 250 to 500.
Okay, very good. This sounds like an amazing investment opportunity, and I love hearing about these sectors of the marketplace that I'm not as involved with, and industrial is certainly one of those. And obviously, Irwin Boris, this is an expert everyone's listening to right now. This is the person to talk to if you're looking to get into an investment that's outside of multifamily, outside of single unit residential. This is something that can give you a great return and be quite safe. And so I think that this is an amazing opportunity. So Irwin, if we have listeners who would like to reach out to you and learn more about this, what's the best way that they can reach you?
Sure. You could put my name in the search bar at Google. You'll find me. I'm highly searchable, either on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. You could email me at irwin.boris@Paycar Capital, Peykar Capital.com. And you'll find me. I do respond to emails. We have investors all in different time zones, so I'm used to it. And, we'll put you on our distribution list. In the simplest way to understand how I look at an investment is if I said to you, take your body weight and compound at 3% a year for the next 7 or 10 years. And women are the first to respond, no, I know I got fat. And that's how, I could tell you that where your return is coming from. So if you're getting 8 to 10% current and the rents are growing at contractually 3% or more a year, by the time you get to the end, you put those two pieces together, you've doubled your money. So
Right. That's a great analogy.
it's the truth. So if you're getting a large amount of your money through current distributions, then your IRR, if that's how you base an investment, is pretty much locked in because you're getting it.
It sounds like an amazing opportunity. I may be in touch.
No, I tell you, I love it. My kids are in some of my deals, and they love seeing that money show up quarterly.
Sure.
And typically, I get the quarterly distribution out before the end of the quarter because we have the cash. It's not like I need to find it. And we only leverage 65% with the banks, so we don't take an excessive amount of leverage. We only do fixed rate debt, so I don't want to know about the mortgage changing every month. And I tend to overcapitalize a little. I don't like to have to tell my partners I need money for some unforeseen thing. We like to assume something's going to happen and plan for it. And then if it doesn't happen 2-3 years from now, like we had one deal upstate New York, we had an extra $500,000. So we gave everybody last year a Christmas distribution of an extra $500,000.
Hey, that sounds good to me. I'm sure you got no complaints about that.
No, everyone said, they said, oh, we got 2 ACHs. What's the second one? I said, well, we had excess cash. We figured, maybe you could use it.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, it sounds like a tremendous business, and you certainly are an expert in that field. And I'm so very appreciative of the time today that you've spent with us explaining this and giving people some insight into this world. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. I'm happy to give back. Taking a journey's been an interesting ride with all the asset classes, although we still do own assets in all the food groups. But, this is the one that we're most focused on right now.
Well, it's fantastic. I am so pleased to introduce people to this. So anyone interested in an opportunity like this, please feel free to reach out to Irwin, because it's certainly an avenue that could be very lucrative for you if you're looking to do something a little different and looking for something outside of the stock market, outside of regular residential investment. So Irwin Boris, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. Absolutely. Thank you for everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on Real Estate on the Up. Take care. As we conclude another eye-opening episode of Real Estate on the Up, I want to express my appreciation for joining us. Thank you for being a valuable part of the Real Estate on the Up community. Your time and engagement mean the world, so make sure you subscribe and leave a review. Your real estate goals are my priority, and my team and I are here to provide the personalized attention and service that have earned us high recognition. If you have questions, need guidance, or are ready to make a move, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm just a message away. I'm Kyle Madorin, one of Rate My Agent's top 100 in the United States, signing off. Until next time, take care and make those real estate dreams a reality.